You know that little FDIC logo you see at the bank? It's everywhere. And it gives us this, warm feeling of security. It's this promise from the government saying, hey, your money's safe with us. But have you ever stopped to wonder what really backs that promise? Like, if things went really bad, is the cash actually sitting there? Well, let's dig in and break down the numbers because they might surprise you. Okay, let's not beat around the bush. I want to start with the single most important number in this entire story. Get this. For every single $100 of deposits that the FDIC insures, it actually has about $1.40 in its insurance fund. Yeah, $1.40. When you see it put that bluntly, it definitely makes you raise an eyebrow, right? It just begs the question.
So, okay, how could a system like that possibly work? I mean, with that little cash on hand. Well, to even begin to understand it, we first have to get our heads around the mind-boggling scale we're talking about here. The gap between what's promised and what's in the piggy bank, it's just staggering.
All right, first, let's look at the size of the total promise. The FDIC, they're on the hook for over $10 trillion in bank deposits all across the U.S. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 10 trillion. It's an absolutely colossal liability. And now, here's the fund that's actually set aside to cover that giant promise. It's about $150 billion. So now you can really see the math, right? We have a $10 trillion problem and a $150 billion solution. It's just a tiny fraction of what it's supposed to cover. And this, of course, leads us to the million-dollar question, or I guess the trillion-dollar question. In a real systemic crisis, that $150 billion fund, phew, it could be wiped out in an instant. So what happens then? Does the whole promise just break?
Well, believe it or not, the answer is no, it doesn't break. It turns out there is a very specific, well-thought-out emergency playbook for exactly this scenario. The fund running dry isn't actually the end of the story. Nope, it's just the beginning of the real response. And this response is incredibly structured. It's a step-by-step process. Okay, so step one, the FDIC has a $100 billion credit line with the U.S. Treasury that it can use immediately. But look, in a major collapse, that's not going to be enough, right? So we go to step two. Congress steps in and passes emergency legislation to increase that borrowing limit, basically to whatever number it takes. And that leads us to the final step, step three, where the Federal Reserve itself intervenes to provide all the liquidity, all the cash needed to make every single depositor whole.
But let's pause on that last step for a moment, because the Fed providing the cash, that's the whole ballgame. It really begs the question, where does the Federal Reserve just get trillions of dollars in an emergency? Well, my friends, this is where we get into the reality of what we all call printing money. So to really get this, there's a key term you've got to know: buyer of last resort. Think about it like this. In a major crisis, the government has to borrow huge amounts of money, and it does that by selling debt or bonds. But what if nobody wants to buy it? What if the market is too scared? Well, that's when the Federal Reserve steps in. It becomes the buyer when no one else will. Here's the play-by-play of how it works. The Treasury needs cash, so it issues a bunch of bonds. Then the Federal Reserve creates brand new money. Yep, pretty much out of thin air, and uses that new money to buy the bonds from the Treasury. That cash then flows to the FDIC, which uses it to pay back all the depositors. That's it. That is how the whole system is funded in a true gloves-off emergency. Okay, so problem solved, right? The government can just create whatever money it needs to save everybody. Sounds simple. But as you've probably already guessed, creating trillions of new dollars, well, it doesn't come for free. It has consequences. And this is where we get into a really fierce debate among economists. Now, to understand one side of this debate, you have to wrap your head around a kind of strange concept. When a bank fails, the digital money that was in your account, it doesn't just go to someone else. It's effectively erased. It vanishes. Think about it. Most of our money is just a digital entry on a bank's ledger. When the bank fails, that ledger entry gets wiped out. Poof. This actually shrinks the total amount of money in the economy, and that is a massively deflationary force. It's the kind of thing that can cause prices and the entire economy to just collapse. So this is the crucial point. This one single action, creating money, can be seen in two completely different ways. On one hand, the argument for it says you're not really causing inflation. You're just replacing the money that literally vanished. You're just filling a giant deflationary hole to stop a depression in its tracks.
But then there's the other side. The argument against it says that by creating trillions of dollars out of thin air, you risk a total loss of global faith in the currency. And if that happens, the dollar's value could plummet, the cost of everything we import would skyrocket, and you could trigger a whole different kind of crisis, runaway inflation.
All right, so let's tie all this together. What is the fundamental trade-off that's sitting right at the heart of our financial system? And, what does this all ultimately mean for your money, for your savings? Okay, so here are the big takeaways. First, yes, the system is absolutely designed to work. It's built to prevent a 1930s-style Great Depression event. Second, your deposits are, in the end, protected by the full power of the U.S. government. But third, and this is the big one, the tool they use for this protection is creating absolutely vast sums of new money. And that leads to the final point. This creates a very real, long-term risk of devaluing every single dollar you have. And that really leaves us with the final, big, thought-provoking question. We've built a system that is incredibly powerful, a system designed to save our deposits from a catastrophic bank failure. But in actually using that system, do we ultimately threaten the long-term value of the dollar itself? The system can save our deposits for sure, but can it save the dollar's value in the process? That is the trillion-dollar trade-off.